Lesson 9.1, Zero Product Property. All right, so this property is very simple and it's one that you already know. All this property is talking about is if something is multiplied times zero, it's going to give you a zero, right? And so kind of an implied idea is that if you have a times b, right, let's say you don't know what's in here, a times b is giving you zero, well then either the a is a zero or the b is a zero, or I guess possibly they could both be zero. So that's the idea behind today's lesson, is that if you have something multiplying, two things being multiplied and giving you zero, one of those or possibly both of those have to be a zero. All right, so we're going to use this to solve some equations, and these are actually quadratic equations. Let's take a look at the first one. All right, it says, what are the zeros for the following equations? Well, essentially here, y'all, we're going to solve for x, okay? So this outside x times this group here is giving us 0. So either this x is 0 or this group is equal to 0. And so since we don't know which one it is, we have to assume that both could be happening. All right, so since this x is outside by itself, but it is multiplying something, possibly this x could be 0. Right? Because then if it was 0, 0 times whatever this is will give me 0. All right, or maybe it's not 0, but let's see. Let's see here. What if x minus 8 was equal to 0? Right? What if this group was equal to 0? All right, well, that would also make me get a 0 when we multiplied. So essentially then we have to find x. Okay, well, what x makes this 0? So I'm just solving this teeny tiny little equation for x. I'm going to add 8 to both sides. And so I guess x could possibly be 8. So x could be 0 or x could be 8. I've got two possibilities here. Let me show you what this looks like on a graph. So I'm going to go to y equals, and I want you all to notice that I did not put equals 0. I just put the left side of the equation in y equals. All right, now let's take a look at its graph. Okay, so we can see that we have right here x equaling 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and x equaling 8, right? Those are the two zeros for my quadratic, and those are also the two zeros that I found for my equation, right? X equals 0 and x equals 8. So when you use a 0 or an 8 in this equation right here, it makes the whole quadratic equal to 0, right? That's why we see the zeros on the graph. On the right, you've got a couple of items, a couple of problems that you can try. If you want to pause the video to try them, go ahead and do that now. Otherwise, I'm going to run through them very quickly. All right, just like the first one we did. Either this term right here is equal to 0, right? Either 2x is equal to 0, or this group over here, x minus 4 is equal to 0, right? One of these, or possibly both of these, is 0 for us to be getting 0 when we multiply. All right, so now I got to solve for x, which means I just got to divide out this 2, and 0 divided by 2 is just 0. And here I'm going to add 4, which means on the right here I got x equals 4. So I either have x equals 0 or x equals 4. And you can plug it in your calculator if you want to check it. On the next one, same thing. Either this outside term is equaling 0, or the parentheses is equaling 0, or both. So we're going to solve for x to figure out what's going on. Okay, so this x is 0. Subtract 3 here, or this x is negative 3. All right, so either x is 0 or x is negative 3. Okay, let's try another example, another type of example, I should say. All right, this time, I don't have just x over here. I have another quantity. All right, but it's still saying this group times this group is giving me 0, which means one of them, or possibly both of them, are equal to 0 themselves. All right, well, let's see which it is. All right, x minus 8 is giving me 0, or sorry, could possibly be 0, or x plus 8 could possibly be 0. And then we just solve. These are super easy to solve. You probably don't even need to write these out. So let's see, either x is 8, or x is negative 8, right? If I use an 8 in the equation, I'll get 0, or if I use a negative 8 in the equation, I'll get 0. And again, A super easy way to check your answer, or honestly just do the problem, is to put this in your calculator. We've got x minus 8, and we've got x plus 8, and I want to know, where do I have it equaling 0? So look at my graph, and I've got it here at -8, and I've got it here at positive 8, right? Check my two answers. Both of them, when you plug them in, give you a 0. All right. Next two problems. Again, if you want to try these by yourself, pause the video. Now's the time to do that. If not, I'm going to run through these really quickly. All right. This one might be the 0, x minus 1 equals 0. Or this group might be the 0, x minus 4 equals 0. If you can do these in your head, go for it. So x is possibly 1 or 4, right? If I use 1 for x, I'll get a 0. If I use 4 for x, I'll get a 0. So I've got two possible numbers that will give me this 0. Last but not least, it's probably overkill, but hopefully you understand, right? Either of these groups could possibly be 0, so I'm going to solve both of them. All right, looks like if I use -7 for x, I'll get a 0. Or if I use -2 for x, I'll get a 0. Right? We just take each group, set it equal to 0, and solve. All right, last but not least. Last but not least, and I'm going to do something a little different on this one. I'm going to actually show you the graph first. So let's go to y equals. We're going to type this in here really quickly. I've got 8x plus 4, and I've also got x minus 8, and I'm looking for the zeros again. All right, so I'm going to graph it. So let's get a good graph this time. Ooh, dang. All right, look, I've got one at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've got a 0 at x equals 8. But what is this? It's between 0 and 1. Sorry, 0 and -1. It looks like it's right in the middle, but I want to be sure. All right, so sometimes our calculator doesn't give us these exact answers, right? What happens if it falls between a hash mark here and you have to actually know the exact number? Well, then let's make sure we know how to do this process that we've been working on. All right, we're going to set the first group equal to 0 and solve, right? And I've got a few more steps to do this time. I'm going to start by subtracting 4. Now I've got 8x equals -4. Now I'm going to divide out the 8. So I've got x equals -4 divided by 8, which I hope we know is -1/2, which is great because that is totally what I see in the graph. -1/2 is what I would have guessed. Looks like I would have been right. Now I have another 0, right? There's another way that I could have this equation equaling 0, and that's if the second group equals 0. In order for us to get 0 there, it looks like x would have to be a positive 8. All right, so if I use -1/2 for x, I'll get 0. Or if I use 8 for x, I will get 0, right? That's why we see two zeros in the graph. All right, you got two more examples to try, so if you want to do that now, pause the video and give it a shot. Otherwise, we're going to run through these pretty quickly. All right, looks like I've got two ways to get a 0 here. One of the ways is if x equals -3. And this other group, let's see here, 4x minus 2 equals 0. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. I've got 4x equals 2. Divide by 4, and I've got x equals 1/2. Looks like if I use -3 for x or 1/2 for x, I'll get a 0. So this is where I would see the zeros if I were to graph it. Okay, last example. Here we go. We've got 2x plus 6 equal to 0. And we've got 2x plus 2 equal to 0. Right? Two different x's could possibly give me zeros here. So let's figure out what those are. We're going to subtract 6 from both sides and got 2x equals -6. Divide out the 2. And I've got x equals -3. So if I use -3 for x, I'll get a 0. My other one, let's see here. I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. I've got 2x equals -2. Divide out that 2, and I've got x equals -1. All right, so it looks like I've got a -3 and a -1 for my zeros. If I could give you a piece of advice on this lesson, if you have a graph or if you have an equation equal to 0 and you're asked for the zeros, go ahead and put it in your calculator. do it in your calculator first, just to get a good idea of where you expect those numbers to be. And if they do look like this one did, right, kind of in between a hash mark, then just remember you know the process, how to set it equal to 0 and solve it by hand.